Okay, this session is working on sway bar info. If I remember correctly, kind of embarrassing how I've been floundering about at the start of this programming session. Basically, I had this idea of monitoring all available network devices other than loopback for the network graph. Basically, it displays every 5 seconds the number of bytes written and received on a single interface. But I had the idea of doing that for every interface other than loopback. I'm actually planning on adding one more feature later on, a blacklist, so that you can exempt a specific interface or so, at least one, from the all interface checking thing. So right now I'm getting a feel for the code again. It's written in Rust, swaybar info that is. So the code that handles the network device um following how much bytes were written and sent and received is in proc, which happens to be a very handy directory on Linux systems, probably Mac OS as well, I'm not so sure. Proc/net/dev goes to the file that tells you how many bytes were written on an interface and received. And for every interface you have on your system, it lists this, which is why I'm going to add this blacklist interface feature later. I haven't done it in this session. It'll be added later. So, getting a feel for the code still, since I haven't worked on swaybar info for a while. So basically, the handling of getting the data is cached by setting the down and up member variables of netinfo. Pre-down and pre-up are set to down and up respectively after fetching the diff, as fetching traffic stats depends on the current amount of bytes written and received changing in proc.net.dev. The idea is to get a line per every interface that is available other than loopback. So I need to have some kind of checking on that line, which is slowly done through iterator interfaces in Rust. Takes a while because I'm not used to Rust as much as I am to C++ actually. Different APIs, standard library APIs. Still wrangling the iterator interface to a line. It starts by splitting white space, and I know that the first element is the interface name, which is what I'm working with. That's why it ends up with a dot take open paren 1 close paren, which takes the first value in the iterator. Yeah, Rust kind of has a ternary syntax. In C and C++, it's like expression, question mark, first result, colon, second result. In Rust, you can do ternary by doing if, expression, and then open curly brace your first part, close curly brace, else, and then open curly brace the second part, close curly brace. I've kind of forgotten about it while I was writing this part code. I know it exists, but I couldn't get it down properly. Maybe I was thinking of Lua or something, because of that then doesn't exist in Rust. The filter map is very unnecessary. I do change it back to a regular filter because this filter map doesn't change the input that's given to the closure. By the end of the iteration functions, there has to be some kind of function call, something to actually make the iterators do its stuff. Because if you just do let something equals iterator, the iterator functions won't resolve until you make it be accessed in some way, which I do eventually have later on. Iterators in Rust, just very, it's a whole beast of its own, but even once you get it down, it's very handy. This first part of code attempts to merge the iterator values into a string, but I end up realizing it's better to use a boolean because I don't need to change the input. I just need to know if the input is a valid interface for the first line or for the first word in the line. And this is one mistake that I don't catch until much later on. I checked against the netdev string the output of the proc netdev file. It should be self.dev name. I end up using netdev string improperly again later on in the code. Sorry about that. Kind of embarrassing, actually. Yeah, right here. It shouldn't be netdev string in this line. I fixed that eventually. Eventually. So starts with expects a pattern. Apparently it also accepts a string slice, but not a complete string, which makes sense. It doesn't need to take a string ownership for any reason because it's checking the string that's being passed to it with the current itself. Again, improper use of the dev string set of what it's set to. Sorry about that. Kind of embarrassing. Should be self.dev name. A little bit jank at this part of the code to get it working the way I want it to, but I managed to get it reasonable. Because that if statement resolves with the return inside of it, I don't need to encase the rest of the code in an else, which is nice. You don't want to add additional edited lines to the Git history. The idea here is to create two variables, one for received bytes, one for uploaded bytes. And for every line that is accepted, sum up the bytes and then set the entries later. So for some reason, unsigned 64-bit summed with a thing that calls parse doesn't seem to tell parse what the type should be. I kind of test that later. I had the right idea there with that turbofish syntax, but some kind of trying to figure out stuff at the moment. Interestingly, setting the variable that's a U64 works. Summing it into a U64 There's apparently not enough information for the compiler to know what type it needs, which is why the turbofish syntax is used here. Kind of unusual, but whatever, I guess. Now that I've gotten the new changes to compile, which I know is flawed beforehand, afterhand, whatever, in hindsight, it's kind of painful, but yeah. Can't find that device. I'm glad that it returned an error at all. If it didn't have that print, I would still be stuck on it for longer, I would think. This problem just is from reusing the text of the proc.netdev instead of the device name that I mentioned earlier. And it takes me an annoyingly long time to realize this. This is when I change the string to a bool, which makes more sense. Because I'm not modifying the value in the iterator. Yeah, so at this point, I think I start adding print lines to figure out what went wrong. Well, after some thinking. Consuming the iterator by using the count function I think I used, which gets the number of items in the iterator. Without such a function, the iterator won't resolve. Yes, I used count. Okay. So that's just, if it's non-zero, then there exists a valid interface in the proc.netdev file. First, the print lines inside the closure. Of course, that part of code will only run if the device is set to all instead of a specific name. Oof, semicolon. This isn't Python. It is getting the lines, but there's an error, which is set up such that if there is an error, it will stop querying proc.netdev. I think this is where I realized it. That netdev.string isn't being used properly. About here. Proper use of variable name finally, the name of the interface I'm checking against. Now it works. At least for a specific interface name. And the second fix, check against the actual name passed to the program. And now it works. An additional print line here to ensure that the all word actually checks all devices. Prints 3 lines per invocation. So it definitely is getting every non-loopback device interface, net interface. The feature is basically done at this point. There's just some additional things to do. Testing to make sure it works. Clippy fixes to ensure that the code is ideal, I guess one could say. This change is unrelated to the feature I just added, the Clippy warning, so I split that up into a separate git commit. Doing another cargo update. It did update one package, so I figure at least I should commit that separately. changing the version to 0.2. Kind of would feel more organic to update the minor version or the patch version, but this is a new feature. Might as well follow Semver and bump the minor version to 2. So after this session, I'm planning on adding a new feature to this. Basically, like I mentioned before, a way to blacklist interfaces from being counted when you use the all word. The next Asciinema you're going to see will probably be a session implementing that for sway bar info. Thanks for watching.